Jelva Deutschen, and this is In Talks With, a series of bite-sized chats about culture from lockdown and beyond.
I'm so pleased you got in touch with me.
Oh, well, me too. Thank you for doing this.
No, it was so great. And I couldn't remember I remember doing the Violet Sessions podcast, but I couldn't remember if we did it at the Port Eliot Festival, or did we? I have a feeling we did it in London, because
we did it in Port Eliot.
Did we?
Yeah, and we were sort of at a table in the cafe, which was quite noisy, but we were just making the best of it.
That's right. I remember it was pouring with rain most of the time, and that cafe, the Violet Cafe, was the only enclave that where you could shelter from the rain.
Exactly. It poured the entire weekend.
Oh, it was tough. And but I also remember going to your book launch at Dawn Books on Marylebone.
Oh, right, you were there. I forgot that you were there. Yeah.
So I suppose. So what have you been up to since then?
Well, I've actually mainly been writing. I've been writing a screenplay and a TV series, an animated TV series proposal. But the book that I had sent to you, One Last Lunch, the lunch that I wrote in that, I actually think is maybe the best thing I've ever written. I really love it, and I love the book. So I hope you did too.
I did, and I'm looking forward to talking about it. I guess I should just say for the record that we are speaking over the internet, not in person, unfortunately, like we did last time. And it's the 10th of August, 2020. I'm in London, and I think you're at home.
I'm at home in Taos, New Mexico.
And tell me what you can see.
Oh my gosh. I can see 100 miles to the west, across horizon after horizon of extinct volcanoes, which looks like the ocean. And that's why I bought this land, was for that view. It also means that this house is rather windy, because 100 miles to the west is, a lot of space for the wind to pick up. So it's kind of Wuthering Heights sometimes. But it's not Wuthering today, so that's a good thing. And I have a field in front of my house, which hasn't been cut yet, so it's purple with alfalfa. And lots of sunflowers, which are weeds here. They just grow everywhere. And at this time of year, they're in flower. So there's just sunflowers everywhere. And that's lovely.
Well, to someone like me, someone like me stuck in a very hot and sweaty West London during a heat wave in my bedroom, because it's the only quiet room in my house, that sounds kind of like another world, and heavenly.
It is heavenly. I love living here. I never actually thought I was going to leave England, because I was born in London and then moved to the States, and then moved back to London just before, when I was 16, and went to university there. And I never thought I was going to live in the US again, but I didn't know Taos existed. And it's just this wonderful little kind of Shangri-La, this valley up in the mountains, but a big wide valley, that it just, it doesn't really feel like it's the rest of the US, which of course at the moment is, especially a good thing.
It must be really nice to be out of all of that.
It really is. Yeah. It's basically very sane here. It's kind of, the culture here is Hispanic crossed with hippie. So the Spanish have been here since the 16th century. Actually, the Spanish have been in this part of the US since before the English arrived on the East Coast. So there's a very old Hispanic culture here. And then the hippies, well, the artists found it in the very late 19th century. And all kinds of artsy people came here. There was a woman called Mabel Dodge who married a man from Taos Pueblo called Tony Lujan. So she's called Mabel Dodge Lujan. And she was an heiress and built this beautiful, enormous adobe house. And she brought D.H. Lawrence here. He actually died here. She brought Aldous Huxley and Jung and Stephen Spender and Alfred Stieglitz, who brought his girlfriend, Georgia O'Keeffe. That's how she came to New Mexico. They all originally came to Taos. And then in the 60s, Dennis Hopper kind of, quote unquote, discovered it with Easy Rider. And then he bought the Mabel Dodge Lujan house, in fact, and lived here for a while. And then it became there were a number of communes around the place. And
I feel like I should, before we get to the book, which is why we are talking, I feel like we should give my listeners a bit of background about you. And you were born in London and raised in Ireland.
Yes.
Raised in Ireland, the daughter of Ricki Soma, which is pertinent, at least, because we're going to talk about her, and the legendary film director John Huston. Anjelica Huston is one of your siblings. Your mother was very sadly killed in a car accident when you were 4, and you were raised by John, although you subsequently discovered that he was not, in fact, your biological father. Your biological father was a man named John Julius Norwich, a Viscount and a historian. And you've had a background in publishing, and like you said, you spent time in London before you moved back to the US, and you've written especially beautifully about your childhood. You wrote Love Child, a memoir, A Family Lost and Found, which you published just over 10 years ago. And a few years ago, you wrote your first novel, Say My Name, which relates to a woman's journey to self-empowerment and is what brought you and I together for the first time to talk.
We should actually say that it's been retitled for paperback. So it's now called A Stolen Summer, if anyone's interested in checking it out.
So should we come on to, I wanted to talk about, because I was just leading on from your novel and then sort of, and thinking about how you clearly spent a great deal of time dwelling on the past and what it means. I'm personally someone who suffers, I don't know if I suffer, but I spend a lot of time thinking about the past and nostalgia, and I sometimes feel like I belong in the past somehow. But tell me about this book, One Last Lunch, which is edited by Erica Heller.
So it's called One Last Lunch, and then the subtitle is A Final Meal with Those Who Meant So Much to Us. And the concept is that all the various people who've contributed to the book, of which there are 49, because Erica wrote 2 pieces, so there are 50 pieces in all. We are all imagining having one final lunch with someone we love who is now dead. And Erica, who, by the way, is the daughter of Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22, actually happened to read my novel, A Stolen Summer. I'll repeat the title. I'll be professional. And she contacted me out of the blue. I just, got an email through my website saying, I've got this idea for this book, and here's a list of other people who are possibly contributing to it, and would you write a lunch with your mother? And that got my attention because I'm, sometimes, I wouldn't say frequently, but, now and then I'm asked to write something about Dad. And I kind of don't really want to be on the Hollywood child train.
And by Dad, you mean John Huston?
Yeah, I only have one dad, and that's right. John Huston. My father, I have 2 fathers. So Dad could also be, I might refer to as my father, and also John Julius is my father. But I only ever called one person Dad. So, yeah. So, Love Child, obviously it has some famous names in it because I can't help that. That's my family. But it's really the story of a motherless child. It's the story of a motherless child trying to figure out where she belongs in the world. So those, and people who respond to it, in that way, because it's a story of somebody basically kind of trying to figure out how to not be a supporting character in other people's lives and become, take ownership of your own life, finding a family which is all fragmented and, its various members don't know each other, and basically making one family out of, more than 2, frankly, pulling all these pieces together. So, the kind of takeaway, I suppose, from Love Child is that the chains of DNA don't matter. What matters is loving the child. that's all a very long aside to say that when Erica contacted me and asked me to write a lunch with my mother rather than with Dad, I was immediately more intrigued because I felt, she got the point of me and what I'm about. And that, I actually wouldn't really have been that interested in writing a lunch with Dad. Not that I didn't love him and not that it wouldn't be nice, but I wouldn't really I don't know if I'd have much to say, actually. I haven't really thought about it that much, but it might be interesting to try and write one, see if anything came out. But anyway, she asked me to do this, and my immediate response was, oh, wow, that would be amazing. Oh, shit, I guess I'm going to have to do it. Terrified. Basically, terrified of the intensity of emotion it was going to pull up. I lost my mother when I was 4. She died in a car crash. When I wrote Love Child, I had a lot of the letters that she had kept that had been written to her. And I had the letters that she had written to John Julius, my father. But I didn't have letters that she had written to anybody other than that, only the ones that she had received. But she had written him a lot of letters because it was the 60s and people wrote letters then. And he traveled a lot, and also he was married to somebody else. So she couldn't phone whenever she wanted. So I did know a lot about, how she thought and how she felt. So I was intrigued and terrified and didn't do it. And then Erica hounded me. And 6 months later, she kind of kept hounding me. And so eventually I wrote it. And by that time, there were also a couple of friends of mine who were contributing to the book.
Who are the friends?
Actually, I suggested Corinthia West to write about David Bowie. Who she actually took to Port Eliot House because Lord Eliot, I guess it is, whatever his name is, who owns the house, was actually, she was going out with him at the time, and David Bowie was a really close friend of hers, and she took him down there to stay one time. So Corinthia wrote about David Bowie, and my friend Kate O'Toole wrote about her father, Peter. And at the time, Moon Zappa was also writing about her father. But when Moon wrote the piece, which
Frank Zappa.
Yeah, Frank Zappa. Yep. It was incredibly long, and she couldn't get there. There was all this sort of technology that didn't work, and she could never actually get to where Frank was. And it was hysterically funny. But not, she and Erica agreed, unfortunately, that it wasn't right for the book, so it didn't make it in, which is a shame because she's a very close friend of mine and I adore her. But anyway, so Kate, Corinthia, and Tracy Tynan, who wrote about her father, Kenneth Tynan. So in a way, I'm also there's another reason I'm glad I didn't write about my father, because there's actually a lot of fathers in the book. It's a great Father's Day present, by the way, although we missed.
And have you spoken to your fellow writers from this book about what it uncovered for them? And have there been any common themes about things that you discovered through doing it?
I haven't spoken to many of them other than, those friends of mine that I just mentioned, except for Kaylee Jones, who wrote a spectacularly wonderful piece about her father, James Jones, who wrote From Here to Eternity. And she does something that nobody else in the book does, which is she imagines her father as a young man, not the person she knew. And she kind of appears to him in a malarial hallucination during the Second World War. And she's sort of, she brings him things like caviar and Pont l'Evêque cheese and says, you don't know what this is yet, but you're going to really like it one day.
Yeah, I like the time travel element, and that was really
it's just a magic piece. I love that. That's my favorite piece in the book. I think it's just extraordinary. But it's very interesting because, a lot of people, I feel, did find it kind of cathartic in one way or another. Not everybody had a sort of satisfactory lunch. And that's why Erica wrote two pieces, because she wrote a piece about, kind of, this is how I wish it was going to be, and everything was sort of sweet and healing and lovely. And then she wrote a piece about, this was having lunch with her father. And then she wrote a piece about how she really thinks it would have gone, which was not sweet and healing at all, in which she was still the same cussed, pain in the ass, demanding, critical asshole, basically, that she always had been. But I feel that the people, she's not the only person kind of for whom that happened. Caroline Levitt's father also just stayed an asshole. And then there was somebody whose mother, I can't remember who it is now, but she's just the most horrible woman. But I sort of feel that there's a kind of coming to terms with in those pieces where a difficult personality remains difficult, and there isn't the kind of wished for sentimental, kind of hearts and flowers Hallmark kind of ending.
I like the Jessie Kornbluth one, the Jessie Kornbluth essay.
He wrote about Nora Ephron, yeah,
and how she didn't really like him, and she wouldn't really want to have lunch with him, which I loved.
Yes, and then Oliver Sacks doesn't turn up.
Yeah.
For his lunch with his nephew. He's just never, which apparently I guess was characteristic of him. But I think that's one of the things I really like about the book, is that it's not sentimental. It's really tender and really moving, and very kind of almost all the pieces are really sort of deeply felt. But I never felt kind of my heartstrings being tugged on. And I just, I don't find it sentimental or hallmarky at all, which is really quite an achievement. And I think something that Erica was very focused on, and is to her credit.
Did it change your perspective on your mother, the story you wrote? And have you shown it to your siblings or to other people who knew her, and what have they said about it?
I have. The general opinion among my sort of siblings and close friends is that it is the best thing I've ever written. So that's nice to feel, because I think they all feel that it's very honest, and that I ended up feeling much closer to Mum than I ever have as a result of writing this. And what was very interesting to me that came out, as I was writing it, I'm not the kind of person who gets ideas first and then sits down and write them. I'm better off sort of just, improvisational writing and see what comes out and then work on that. And one of the ideas that I got that really kind of, spoke to me, resonated, sparked, whatever, is that I'm older than my mother was. So even though she's my mother...
She died in her 30s.
She was 39 when she died. And I'm in my 50s. So it was a very strange feeling. And it's something I've kind of discussed with my sister Anjelica in the past, when both of us had the same thing when we hit 40. It's like, oh my God, we're older than Mom. But as we were having this lunch in my imagination, I was thinking, I've actually kind of gotten through the turbulent waters to a place of calm waters, but she died when she was still in the turbulence. So I can give her some perspective on kind of what it's going to be like.
What do you mean by the turbulence? What do you mean by the turbulence?
Well, she was married very young. She married when she was 20. She had 2 children by the time she was 22. She was married to an extremely difficult man, who she was his 4th wife. He very soon embarked on affairs with, this one and that one. Had a child with another woman. That's my brother Danny. And, so she, was kind of left in his wake and moved to London from Ireland. Once she had kind of done up the house and, raised the children to school age, she was kind of not really of that much use to him anymore, except as a sort of decoration at premieres. She moved to London, had a few affairs with men who were almost always married, because as I say in the piece, every man worth having was married then, and Mum had been brought up to look only at men worth having, including my father. And so, so that's what I mean by turbulence. She was caught up in the turbulence of where she belonged, love affairs. She was, by that time, the mother of 3 children, one of whom, me, was quote unquote, not technically illegitimate because she'd never divorced Dad. And of course, I wonder why she hadn't. So, I would ask her at lunch. Struggling for money. Dad didn't give her quite enough to live on, as it turns out. And her father would kind of dole out some money to her now and again, but he was an incredibly difficult man. He was mad. My grandpa, he used to stand on his head all day long singing "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning" when I lived with him for a year on the roof, naked. So that was Mum's dad, Mum's father. He was Italian. He owned an Italian restaurant in New York called Tony and Tony's Wife, which gives you an idea of how he treated women.
Gosh,
His wife didn't even have a name, right?
Men. Mm.
Yeah. So so she was still, she hadn't found serenity. She hadn't found her place in the world. She hadn't, she hadn't felt yet that she had, launched her children well, that her job was done. My brother Tony was 18 and Anjelica was 17 when she died. So they were still, they really lost a mother they really needed at that point in their lives, and I was 4, obviously. So I found myself in the course of this lunch, instead of, what I would have thought is that I would have wanted Mum to comfort me for my loss of her. In fact, what I found was happening was that I was comforting her and letting her know that it actually all turned out fine. That how awful it must have felt at the moment of her death to know, what she was leaving behind, and the uncertainty and the fear and what would happen to me, without, at that point, either a mother or a father. I mean, I was so fatherless at that point that she hadn't even put a father's name on my birth certificate. She put unknown. She knew perfectly well, but she put unknown. So I was a fatherless child, and now I was going to be motherless also. So I really wanted her to know that it turned out great, that I'm very happy with my life, that I was close both to Dad, whom she had left, and to John Julius, whom she wasn't sure I would ever know, given the fact that he was married to Anne, and had 2 other children, Jason and Artemis, who I'm very close to. So I think she would be incredibly happy to know that that I have pulled this family together, that I am so close to all of my siblings, and was very close to John Julius until he died 2 years ago. This sort of wealth of family that Mum gave me, she didn't expect that, So there was this very interesting sort of reversal of, kind of who's comforting who, but also a sense arose from it that that I'm kind of carrying on Mum's life. I'm like her in a lot of ways, I believe, as I'm told by various people who knew her, far better than I did. And apparently my house looks like her house would look. I have her taste, her visual taste, more so than Anjelica has, or Tony. Anjelica has really good, beautiful taste as well. Her house is gorgeous. But my house is kind of a bit rattier and shabbier. Mum liked old things. She liked things that were sort of stained and torn and, had the marks of age on them. And my house is more like that than Angel's is. It's also kind of hand built because I designed it, and my son's father and I built it. It's
interesting that you can inherit taste.
It is, isn't it? Because, you could say, well, maybe I maybe I learned it in those first 4 years of my life, that, that kind of taste is what feels comfortable to me, and so it's come out that way, and maybe it's not actually genetic, but it's so curious what things are. My godmother told me that Mum used to eat really fast, and I eat really fast. So it seems like that's genetic. I'm not the youngest child of a big family that I had to eat fast, or, any of that, all the reasons that people do. So, I mentioned that in the lunch, just it's a kind of curiosity, and I wouldn't have mentioned it except for the fact that we're having lunch. So we're obviously both eating fast. Things like that are just so, you find these I found these connections with Mum that I never found when I was writing Love Child, because that was just a different story.
Thank you so much for speaking to me, and please keep me posted about future projects. I'm so pleased that we reconnected.
I will. Yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to In Talks with me, Danielle Radoichin. The sound and theme music were by Wargie Productions, and the artwork is by Patrick Waugh. If you enjoyed this episode, please pass it on to someone who you think might also like it. And of course, please do subscribe and leave a review. Thanks for listening.